Hey, welcome back, class. I hope y'all have had a good weekend. Um, an announcement. I've scheduled our second exam for Thursday, April the 14th. Um, now, we're going to have the exam on Top Hat, just as usual, okay? The format of the exam will be the same as our previous exam. Um, but instead of the regular review session, it wouldn't really be practical to play that review game we did last time, just because with 100 students in one like online chat room, it wouldn't really work out. Um, so what I'll do is we'll sort of go the more standard route. I'll post a study guide a week ahead of the exam. The study guide will contain basically a bunch of questions that will be similar to the questions on the exam. Okay, I'll try to guide you towards studying the right material. And then if you have any questions about the study guide or any of the material in general, you can come to online office hours and I will help answer those questions. Okay, let's just do a quick review of last week's material. These last couple of classes, we've been talking about decision theory, okay? And last time we talked about how people make decisions when the situation is uncertain. And today we're going to talk about sort of a related topic, which is how people make decisions, particularly financial decisions, with regards to the future. And one concept that will sort of be relevant for both of these types of decisions is the concept of utility. And so let's just review that real quick. Okay. So first, we saw last lecture that a good way to deal with uncertain events is to follow Annie Duke's strategy, which basically involved maximizing the expected value of a given situation. And the expected value of an uncertain event is basically the amount that you would expect to receive from that event if you were to repeat it many, many times. Okay, it's sort of the average over many, many repetitions. To calculate this expected value, it's basically a relatively straightforward process. You basically take each outcome and multiply by the respective probability of that outcome, and then you sum all of those results. So we had a chance to do that. I showed you guys a few examples of that in the slides, and hopefully on the homework, you went through a few examples of that as well. Now, however, we did find that in certain situations, it doesn't really seem reasonable to maximize the expected value, to follow this strategy too religiously. And in fact, it can lead to certain paradoxical situations if you believe that people always are maximizing the expected value. And so we introduced a slightly different concept. We modified Annie Duke's rule a little bit. And we said that, well, maybe instead of maximizing the expected value, what people usually want to do is to maximize the expected utility. And the utility associated with a given amount of income or a given amount of money shows the law of diminishing returns. Okay, and so that I might be constantly receiving more money in some situation, but if I were to look at how much my utility is increasing in that same situation, it wouldn't be increasing linearly with the amount of money I receive. Instead, my utility, it would still go up as I get more money, but it would sort of flatten out, right? And I would sort of receive less and less utility over time. And so, sort of another way to think about that is, if you give me $1,000 and I start with nothing, I'm going to get a huge increase in utility. But if I already have $1,000,000 and you give me $1,000 on top of that, even though, you're increasing my income by 1,000 in that case as well, the amount that you're increasing my utility by is much less. Okay, so I hope that makes sense to y'all. And we'll be using that concept of utility in this week's video as well. Okay, so let's just jump into the topic of today's class, which is how to calculate or how to think about decisions with respect to the future. So suppose I give you the following question, okay? You can either have $4,000 a week for the rest of your life, okay? Or you can have $2 million right now, okay? That's a choice, all right? $4,000 a week for the rest of your life or $2 million right now. Okay, so I'll give you guys a little bit of time to think about that. Okay, think about which one you would want to choose. Now, there's no necessarily right answer to this question, okay? But what I want to think about is the various things that we would have to take into consideration in order for us to answer this question in a reasonable way. Because even though it seems like a simple question, there's actually quite a few things that we need to take into account, okay? And, there's a lot of situations that are essentially analogous or equivalent to this question, okay? For example, anytime you take out a loan, right? A loan involves getting a lot of money in the present, but then having to pay it back over a long time in the future, okay? Or you could have the opposite of that situation. Consider an educational expense. In that case, you pay the money now, but then later on, because you have more education, you might be able to make more money in whatever occupation you're working in. And so you sort of get some of that money back because you're making more money over time. Right? Same thing, with respect to a business, right? A restaurant might decide to open up a location. Again, that's a lot of money up front, but the extra revenues that you get from that new location might sort of tip the balance of things in the long run. Okay, so these types of decisions over time that involve sort of compromising between money now and money in the future is very common. So in thinking about this question, okay, for $4,000 a week versus $2 million right now, there are a number of things that we have to take into account. Okay, so let's sort of just do the bare minimum accounting. All right, let's just start with the simple, basically just the amount of money that both of these choices involve. Okay, so for example, say you plan to live another 60 years. All right, so how much would $4,000 a week be if you live for 60 years? Well, $4,000 times 52 weeks in a year times 60 years amounts to something like $12 million. Okay, now that's obviously more than $2 million. Or here's another way to look at it. If you divide 2 million by 4,000, that would be 500 weeks or roughly 10 years. So basically, after 10 years, the person who chose the $4,000 a week option would receive $2 million, just like the person who took $2 million up front. So by this simple accounting, you probably would conclude that the $5,000 a week is the better option, as long as you expect to live for more than 10 more years. Okay. But this explanation doesn't take into account many things. Okay. Because, I should say 4 reasons. Because money over time loses value for at least 4 reasons. Okay. The first reason is interest rates. If you get the money earlier, you can invest it at the prevailing interest rate, and that money will have more time to appreciate. This is a significant effect. We'll be talking about this in a lot more detail. The second reason is diminishing marginal utility. As I mentioned before, your satisfaction has diminishing returns in income. Your utility function has diminishing returns. So this can sort of change the math a little bit, and you'll see how. Third is the effect of inflation. Prices are going to be higher in the future. So $4,000 in 10 years won't buy you as many goods as $4,000 today. And then finally, of course, there's simply the effect of human impatience. People prefer to have things now rather than later, and this is reflected in most of our decision-making and most of our economy in general. As the economist John Maynard Keynes famously remarked, in the long run, we're all dead. So now, okay, we're not going to consider all of these explanations in the lecture, okay, but we are going to consider the first two. We're going to pay attention to these first two, interest rates and diminishing marginal utility. And you'll see how these two factors potentially tip the math or change the math, so we might reach a different conclusion. Okay, so okay, I actually think that's a good stopping point. Okay, so I'll see you guys in the next video.